Well, hey, folks, if you're listening to the Bryan Kohberger sentencing like I am, you just went through a round of victim impact statements that were incredibly compelling. It was interesting to me how the audience started clapping when family members were expressing more anger and vindictiveness versus those family members who stepped up and offered maybe a little counsel or forgiveness or a little tenderness in this whole thing. I don't think they hurt any worse than anyone else, but I found it so interesting that the audience was clapping when people were vindictive and angry versus offering any kind of compassion. Either way, either family members deserve to feel the way that they feel. But now we're going to go in and listen as the state reminds the judge of all the reasons why Bryan Kohberger should spend the rest of his life in prison. We may hear some things from the defense as they offer some ideas or thoughts that would mitigate those things. And then finally, we're going to get the judge's sentence. So let's watch that now live.
As the record reflects, and as everybody in this courtroom knows, the defendant has pleaded guilty to all 5 counts charged in the indictment. Under oath before Your Honor, he has admitted that the charges against him are true. He has reassured the court that he has not been coerced or threatened to make those admissions. And Your Honor did an extraordinary job in taking the pleas back on July 2nd. We appreciate the court's discipline and insight. The defendant has also waived appeal on the multitude of rulings from this court and Your Honor's predecessor in Latah County on dozens, literally dozens of motions seeking to dismiss the case, seeking to control or limit evidence, seeking to offer evidence that would not be appropriate. And we appreciate the court's consistent rulings based on the law, based on the facts. As Your Honor will recall, on June 18th, it's just really not that long ago, we appeared before this court for arguments on what became the defendant's final motions to this court. Motion where they wanted to offer evidence suggesting that other people were responsible for the defendant's actions, and the motion seeking essentially an indefinite continuance of the trial. It was readily apparent to all of us in the courtroom from Your Honor's comments that those motions were not going to be granted. So we returned to Moscow and continued with what we had been working on for months in preparation for trial. We had no qualms about going to trial if trial was what was necessary and appropriate. The following week after we were in court, we were approached by the defense with an inquiry about a possible plea. And I can tell the court this is the first suggestion ever that there was any consideration, because indeed the defense had maintained from the beginning that Mr. Kohberger, the defendant, was factually innocent. It's clear that the reality of the evidence and the case that had been investigated and prepared and that we were ready to present in court became a reality. Our reaction, among other things, was to reach out to all the families. And in fact, later that week, on Thursday and Friday of that last week of June, we met with representatives by teams, virtual meetings, with representatives of all of the families. And we talked about the status of the case and the upcoming trial and things that related to the trial. And we also let them know that there had been an inquiry about whether there might be an offer for a plea. And we asked the family members for their thoughts and feelings. And they were candid. And they have been candid since, and we respect that. And we understand, recognize, and acknowledge that there was a difference of opinion among representatives of the different families. We understand that. One of the challenges of this case, one of the unique things about this case is we have multiple victims, each unique unto themselves, their families and friends unique unto themselves, and all of them entitled to their opinions, all of them entitled to their thoughts. Over the following weekend, our prosecution team, very skilled attorneys who were personally as well as professionally deeply invested in this case, met. And we talked, and the decision was reached. Well, to start with, were there to be any sort of plea offer or discussion, there's only one possibility. And that would be for the defendant to plead guilty straight up to all charges. There would be no bargaining about counts. There would be no bargaining about reduced sentences. And so we made the proposal to the defense that if the defendant was willing to plead guilty up front to all 5 counts as charged and waive appeal of the court's myriad decisions during the past 2.5+ years on all these motions that would have consumed years, if not decades, of time in the future. By the end of the weekend, we were notified the defendant was prepared to plead guilty as charged and factually acknowledge his responsibility in court for these horrible crimes. Obviously, those discussions and negotiations were confidential. And as Your Honor noted, I believe that was necessarily so, because if the defendant had decided not to plead guilty, it would have been devastating to our jury pool for there to be public information that there had been consideration by either party to a plea resolution. And protecting the prospective integrity of a trial after so many years was paramount. So the end of the weekend came. We notified the victims' families of what had occurred. I recognize and acknowledge personally, and I respect the fact that of these fine, suffering people here, not everybody agreed with the decision we make. I accept that. It's my responsibility in the end. I recognize that that's the duty of the office that I hold. So now, it is time for the judicial system to impose final judgment and close the door on this chapter of these tragedies. As the court is aware, by the agreement of the parties, it is the state's prayer. Perhaps have the Elmo police turned on. Thank you. That on count 1, the felony burglary, that the court sentenced the defendant to the maximum period of 10 years fixed in the custody of the Idaho Department of Correction. And on count 2, that the court sentenced the defendant to fixed life for the murder of Madison Mogen. On count 3, that the court sentenced the defendant to fixed life for the murder of Kaylee Goncalves. On count 4, that the court sentenced the defendant to fixed life for the murder of Xana Kernodle. on count 5, that the court sentenced the defendant to fixed life for the murder of Ethan Chapin. And the state further prays that these sentences be ordered to run consecutively, back to back, not at the same time, to recognize and respect the unique individuality of each of these beautiful young people whose lives were taken brutally and for no reason. And hopefully now, as we have heard earlier this morning, it is time to afford the families and the friends and the community and the state of Idaho and the nation and the world to move forward. We can't undo, and we can never undo, the horror of what occurred on the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022 at 1122 King Street in Moscow, Idaho. For a long time, the presiding district judge in Latah County was John Stegner, who eventually became a member and a justice of the Idaho Supreme Court. And Justice Stegner often observed that even God cannot change the past. But everyone in this room has the ability to take themselves forward. And we want the judicial system to afford them the opportunity today to do that. From today forward, our memories should be focused on these innocent victims whose lives were taken, on their families, on their friends, on the community. The court has heard discussion, talk today, reminiscences today about a special family that our victims shared, not just their natural, legal, and biological families, not just their university family within their sororities, for example. But this family. This is the picture taken on November 12th, 2022, of the special family of 1122 King Road. And you can see all 6 of these dynamic, vibrant, loving, special, innocent faces taken together just across the street from their residence, and barely 12 hours before 4 of them would be brutally murdered in their sleep. They've been described consistently as being bright, caring, vivacious, with futures we can only imagine now. But they were, and they remain, a special family that I think we should all recognize and appreciate. So it's time to move forward. There have been a number of statements directed specifically at the defendant today. I have one last thought. After Your Honor imposes judgment and sentences the defendant to spend the rest of his life in prison, in other words, sentence the defendant to die in prison, he's going to stand up in the belly chains and leg irons that he's wearing today. and he's going to be escorted into the custody of the Idaho Department of Correction. And the door will close behind him forever. That is the closure that we seek, that all of these people, these loving friends and family deserve, so that we can move forward. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. All right, does the defense have evidence to present today? All right. Does defense wish to make argument today?
Runner, we do not wish to make arguments. Mr. Kohberger, along with his legal team, is prepared for the court to enter judgment.
All right, Mr. Kohberger, you have an opportunity to make a statement if you wish to. I take it you are declining.
I respectfully decline.
Well, all right, let me start this morning by acknowledging and thanking those that have come here today in support of their loved ones. And I appreciate your courage and your strength. And I hope that you are able to move on as best as possible. Thank counsel for the professionalism that they've exhibited throughout this case. It's been my great honor to preside in this case and to help bring, to the extent possible, some resolution and hopefully justice to this case. During the quiet morning hours of November 13, 2022, a faceless coward breached the tranquility of 6 beautiful young people and senselessly slaughtered them, 4 of them. Who committed this unspeakable evil was unknown for several weeks, but due to the killer's incompetence and outstanding police work by numerous local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, the person that slithered through that sliding glass door at 1122 King Road now stands before the world and this court unmasked. This unfathomable and senseless act of evil has caused immeasurable pain and loss. No parent should ever have to bury their child. This is the greatest tragedy that can be inflicted upon a person. Parents who took their children to college in a truck filled with moving boxes had to bring them home in hearses lined with coffins. The loss this killer inflicted was not just the death of these people's children, siblings, grandchildren, as we've heard today. It has ripped a hole in their soul, destroying a special part of their very essence. Any person who is a parent defines themselves foremost as such. It is their existence and purpose of being. And it has been stolen from these parents. None of us have experienced the loss these victims have in the unspeakable way that they have. And therefore, none of us can, nor should we, question the way in which they have handled their loss. Whether that be in private mourning, removed as far as possible from this media circus, or in front of a camera demanding retribution with the loudest megaphone. I've listened intently to the stories and pain that have been shared today, with great awe at the courage and resilience of the surviving family members of those wonderful children. I've listened also to the surviving roommates both in person and through their friends. And I can't think of how, frankly, courageous they have been despite the hell that they have faced by uncaring people who have come up with all kinds of crazy theories about two kids simply being kids. The parents, siblings, and other family members who have spoken today are designated as victims in our legal system. But going forward, I hope that they can shed that label, as it gives too much power to the evil that condemned them to that role. They are and should be known as survivors, fighters, and foremost as witnesses to the tremendous lives of value and unbounded promise of these four young people. But those speaking today and those who did not speak, but who carry this same burden, this same loss, now carry forward the memories of these now perpetually young people, these forever children. These survivors carry the responsibility of ensuring that the voices of these children, Maddie, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan, are never forgotten, and the positive impacts that they have had on so many lives are never minimized, and that the love they shared, the light that they shined onto others is forever celebrated. As we sit here today, this case is ending, and we are now certain who committed these unspeakable acts of evil, but we don't know, and what we may never know is why. I share the desire expressed by others to understand the why. But upon reflection, it seems to me, and this is just my own opinion, that by continuing to focus on why, we continue to give Mr. Kohberger relevance. We give him agency and we give him power. The need to know what is inherently not understandable makes us dependent upon the defendant to provide us with a reason, and that gives him the spotlight, the attention, and the power he appears to crave. Yet even if I could force him to speak, which legally I cannot, how could anyone ever be assured that what he speaks is the truth? Do we really believe, after all of this, he's capable of speaking the truth or of giving up something of himself to help the very people whose lives he destroyed? Rather, I suspect the so-called reason would be dished out in enticing, self-serving, and aggrandizing untruthful bits, leaving people wanting more information, more insight, and thus enhancing even further the power he seeks to hold. Even if we could get truthful insight into his why, I suspect it would not in any way quench one's thirst for actually understanding why in the first instance. Because there is no reason for these crimes that could approach anything resembling rationality. No conceivable reason could make any sense. And in the end, the more we struggle to seek explanation for the unexplainable, the more we try to extract a reason, the more power and control we give to him. In my view, the time has now come to end Mr. Kohberger's 15 minutes of fame. It's time that he be consigned to the ignominy and isolation of perpetual incarceration. I know there has been concern about him collaborating on books or movies or other media projects, and I truly hope that someone does not stoop to affording him this spotlight that he desires in the name of clicks, royalties, or profits. While criminal behavioralists should study him away from the spotlight in an attempt to prevent other would-be killers from acting on their worst impulses, there should be no need for that to spill over into the public eye. The great Idaho jurist Edward Lodge was known for trying to find something positive about every person he ever sentenced. And with over a half a century as a trial judge, that was a lot of people. This was often challenging, and I recall in one case he said that the best he could come up with was the defendant had good penmanship. Truth be told, I'm unable to come up with anything redeeming about Mr. Kohberger because his grotesque acts of evil have buried and hidden anything that might have been good or intrinsically human about him. His actions have made him the worst of the worst. Even in pleading guilty, he is giving nothing hinting of remorse or redemption, nothing suggesting even a recognition or understanding, let alone regret for the pain that he has caused. And therefore, I will not attempt to speak about him further, other than to simply sentence him so that he is forever removed from civilized society. And accordingly, based upon his conduct and based upon the record before this court, recognizing the standards that govern this court's sentencing decisions as set forth in State v. Toohill, I hereby sentence Mr. Kohberger as follows. On count 1, burglary, 10 years fixed, 0 years indeterminate. I also impose a fine of $50,000. Count 2, first-degree murder of Madison Mogen. I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. On count 3, for first-degree murder of Kaylee Goncalves, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the victim of the family, or to the family of the victim, pardon me. On count 4, for the first-degree murder of Xana Kernodle, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. On count 5, for the first-degree murder of Ethan Chapin, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. The sentences on counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 shall run consecutively to one another. Restitution will be left open for 60 days. Defendant will be required to submit a DNA sample and a right thumbprint impression to the Department of Corrections and comply with the DNA Database Act. I remand the defendant to the custody of the Idaho State Board of Corrections for to be imprisoned in an appropriate facility in execution of the sentence where he will remain until he dies. Though you've waived your right to appeal, you do have a right to file a notice of appeal, and any such appeal must be filed within 42 days of the date of the written judgment, which will be entered shortly hereafter. Though the appeal, you should be aware, may be deemed a violation of the plea agreement, and so I certainly suggest you discuss that with counsel if that is your desire. I ask the media and public present to allow the families to be escorted out first before they leave. Again, thank you to everyone for your stories today. I am strengthened by them, and I am encouraged by your humanity and strength. And God bless you. We're adjourned.
Well, I hope you'd take a moment to put your comments down below. You know, I'm up here in the mountains. I'm getting some things done on some property that I own, but I couldn't pass up the chance to listen in on what was going on today and to weigh in with some of the video that I'm collecting as I do so. Thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. This has been a horrendous case, and it's been so interesting to watch the dialogue that's gone on among each of you as you've worked through this thing on your own. We can all hope that the families will somehow find a way to take this tragedy and create some memories of their loved ones that will be something beyond the fact that their lives were taken. Hey, thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.